There is a kind of grief that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with fanfare or warning. It settles in slowly, the way cold settles into a room when someone leaves a door open and forgets to close it. Claire knew that kind of grief. She had known it before she could name it. She had known it the morning she watched the nurses pull the sheet over her mother's body, and the room became so still that she could hear her own breathing, slow, uneven, and afraid. She was 34 years old and standing at her mother Margaret's bedside in a hospital in Columbus, Ohio. And in that moment, the only thought in her mind was that she was now the oldest woman in her family. And she had no idea, not the faintest idea, that within 72 hours that grief would be the least of what she was carrying. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you are watching from. We'd love to hear from our community, and it means more than you know. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We tell the stories that don't get told. And this one has been waiting a long time. Margaret Louise Turner was born in 1952 in a working-class neighborhood on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. She was the third of 5 children, raised by a father who worked double shifts at a steel plant and a mother who cleaned houses 6 days a week and went to church on the 7th. Money was never a topic of casual conversation in the Turner household. It was a source of tension, a reminder of what the family did not have, and a subject that Margaret's father treated with something close to reverence, because to him, every dollar represented hours of his life that he would never get back. That upbringing shaped Margaret in ways that nobody, including her own daughter, would fully understand until it was far too late. She learned early that money was a private matter. She learned that talking about it invited trouble. She learned that the safest place to keep your resources was somewhere that nobody else could reach them. And she spent the next 5 decades proving, quietly and methodically, that she had learned those lessons well. Margaret graduated from East High School in 1970 and enrolled in a 2-year bookkeeping program at Columbus Technical College. She married a man named Robert Turner in 1974, a soft-spoken man who worked in insurance, and they had one child together, a daughter they named Claire, born in 1981. Robert passed away from a heart attack in 1993, when Claire was just 12 years old, and from that point forward, Margaret raised her daughter alone. She worked as a bookkeeper for a series of small businesses across Columbus, a hardware distributor, a dental practice, a family-owned shipping company. She drove the same car for 11 years. She bought her clothes at discount stores. She clipped coupons and cooked from scratch and rarely took vacations. To anyone who knew her, Margaret Turner was the picture of a woman living modestly on what modest work provided. She was well-liked, kind, and organized to the point that her neighbors joked she probably had her grocery list color-coded. She did not appear to have any extraordinary financial resources. She did not appear to want any. And that, as it turned out, was exactly the impression she had worked very hard to create. What Margaret was actually doing, quietly and with the discipline of someone who had been practicing patience their entire life, was investing. She had begun purchasing shares in mutual funds as early as 1979, just after Claire was born. She had taken Robert's modest life insurance payout after his death and put every dollar of it into a brokerage account. She had reinvested dividends. She had never sold anything in a panic. She had, in the words of people who study this kind of financial behavior, done the one thing that most people never manage to do. She had left the money alone and let time do its work. She had also, according to people who knew her in her final years, been receiving income from 2 rental properties she had purchased in the late 1980s. Properties that nobody in her family, not Claire, not her siblings, not anyone who visited Margaret's house and admired her curtains and commented on the lovely garden, had any knowledge of. Margaret paid her taxes. Margaret kept her records. Margaret kept her silence. And Margaret kept her secret right up until the morning of March the 9th, when she closed her eyes in Columbus University Hospital and simply did not open them again. By the time Margaret passed, Claire had been married to a man named David Okafor for 11 years. They had met at a mutual friend's birthday party in 2003, when Claire was 22 and David was 26, and the relationship had moved quickly. David was charming and funny and attentive in the way that men sometimes are in the early stages of love, and Claire had been drawn to that quality, the way he remembered details, the way he made her feel like the only person in the room. They married in 2005. They had two sons together. Daniel arrived in 2007 and Marcus arrived in 2009. By most outward appearances, they were a functional family. They lived in a four-bedroom house in Westerville, a suburb north of Columbus. David worked in sales for a mid-sized logistics company. Claire had stepped back from her own career as a medical office administrator to focus on raising the boys. Life was, by the standards they had set for themselves, ordinary. And ordinary, Claire often told herself during those years, was a kind of happiness she was grateful for. And what Claire did not know, what she would not know for some time, was that the texture of that ordinary life was not what she believed it to be. The people closest to us hold the most power to deceive us, not because they are uniquely skilled at deception, but because we have given them the one thing that makes any deception possible. We have given them our trust. And trust, once extended fully, does not come back to us all at once. It unravels. Slowly. In pieces. And sometimes it unravels on a timeline that someone else has been managing for much longer than we realized. Simone Clark had been Claire's closest friend since their second year of university at Ohio State. They had met in a sociology class, sat next to each other by accident on the first day, and discovered over the following weeks that they shared an almost unsettling number of preferences. The same taste in music, the same dislike of mornings, the same tendency to laugh too loudly in places that required some measure of quiet. By the time they graduated, Simone was the person Claire called when anything significant happened in her life. When Claire and David got engaged, it was Simone she phoned first. When she found out she was pregnant with Daniel, it was Simone she told before she told her own mother. Simone was in the delivery room for both boys. Simone was the one who sat with Claire at the hospital when Robert Turner had his heart attack years before, and she was the one who held Claire's hand in the funeral home afterward. She was, in every practical sense, the person that Claire had built her adult life around. A friendship of that depth does not just exist. It becomes load-bearing. It becomes part of the structure of a person's life. And when a load-bearing wall is removed, the damage is not always immediately visible. It shows up later, in cracks, in things that no longer sit level. 4 days after Margaret's funeral, Claire came home from the grocery store to find David sitting at the kitchen table. The boys were at school. The house was quiet in that particular way that houses become quiet when something has gone wrong inside them. David was not on his phone. He was not doing anything. He was simply sitting. And Claire would later tell people that the moment she walked through that door and saw the stillness in his face, she understood on some level that her life was about to change in a way that she was not prepared for. David told her, calmly and with the kind of measured delivery that suggested he had rehearsed the words at least several times, that their marriage was over. He said it was not working. He said it had not been working for some time. He said he thought it was better to be honest now. He did not shout. He did not become emotional. He was, throughout the entire conversation, composed in a way that struck Claire not as strength but as absence. The absence of the guilt that would have been there if the decision had been difficult. He told her he needed her and the boys out of the house within 72 hours. He said he would arrange for them to collect their belongings. He said he was sorry. And then he stopped talking and waited. Claire would later describe those 72 hours as the most disorienting period of her life. She was grieving her mother. She was managing the fear of her two children, who did not understand what was happening and only knew that their father was not speaking normally and their mother kept crying in the bathroom. She was operating on almost no sleep and making decisions. Where to go, what to take, how to explain this to the boys in language that would not permanently damage them, while running on a grief-fueled combination of adrenaline and denial. She called her mother's sister, her Aunt Diane, who lived 20 minutes away, and Diane took them in without asking a single question. Claire and the boys slept in Diane's spare bedroom that first night, Daniel curled up against his mother's side and Marcus asleep across the foot of the bed. And Claire lay in the dark for a long time, looking at the ceiling and trying to understand what had just happened to her family. And then, while she was still in the middle of trying to understand that, Simone's social media profile changed. It was Claire's cousin who saw it first and made the mistake of mentioning it. Simone had updated a photograph. She was smiling. She was standing next to David. The caption did not say much, but it said enough. It said the words, "New chapter," with a small heart emoji. According to people who were close to the situation at the time, the photo had been posted less than a week after Margaret's funeral, while Claire was still packing the contents of her shared home into boxes and trying to explain to a 6-year-old why he couldn't sleep in his own room anymore. The specific timeline of when the relationship between David and Simone had actually begun is something that Claire says she still does not know with complete certainty. What investigators into the civil proceedings that followed would later establish is that there had been communication between David and Simone that predated Margaret's passing by a significant period. The nature and depth of that communication and what it suggested about the timeline of their relationship is something that Claire has described as the part of the story she finds hardest to speak about publicly, not because of what it means about David, but because of what it means about Simone. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from betrayal at that level. Researchers in psychology have studied it at length and given it clinical language. They use terms like attachment injury, which describes the damage that occurs when someone we depend on for emotional safety becomes the source of our greatest threat. They describe the disorientation that follows as something similar to the psychological experience of discovering that the ground beneath you is not solid, that the stability you have been standing on was not real in the way you believed it to be. Claire has spoken in various contexts about the weeks that followed the photo, and across all of those conversations, one phrase recurs. She says that she felt, for the first time in her adult life, that she genuinely did not know who she was in relation to the people she loved. And that feeling, she says, was more destabilizing than anything else that happened to her that year, including what came next. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, approximately 3 weeks after Margaret's funeral. It came in a standard white envelope with the name of a law firm in the upper left corner, a firm called Hargrove and Associates, based in Columbus. Claire did not recognize the name. She assumed in those first few seconds that it was something routine connected to the process of settling her mother's estate, the house, perhaps, or the small savings account she knew Margaret kept. She opened the letter standing at the kitchen table in her Aunt Diane's house, with Marcus playing on the floor nearby and Daniel upstairs doing homework. The letter asked her to contact the firm at her earliest convenience regarding the reading of Margaret Louise Turner's estate. It was signed by a senior partner named William Hargrove. Claire called the number on the letterhead that afternoon. She was given an appointment for the following Friday. She thanked the receptionist, ended the call, set down her phone, and went back to helping Marcus with his puzzle, because that was all she could do. She did not yet know what she was about to walk into. The morning of the meeting at Hargrove and Associates was overcast and cold, the kind of March morning in Ohio that reminds you that winter is not entirely finished with you yet. Claire drove to the office, which was in a mid-rise building in downtown Columbus, and sat in a waiting room that smelled of carpet cleaner and old coffee. She had borrowed a blazer from her Aunt Diane for the occasion. She was shown into a conference room by a paralegal. William Hargrove, a man in his early 60s with reading glasses and the careful, measured manner of someone who delivers difficult news with regularity, greeted her and asked her to sit down. He asked if she had any questions before they began. Claire said she did not. Hargrove nodded. He opened a folder, and he began to read. Margaret Louise Turner's total estate, at the time of her passing, was valued at approximately $47 million. There is no clean way to describe what that moment is like. Claire has tried, in the time since, to explain what hearing that number felt like in a lawyer's conference room on a Thursday morning while wearing her aunt's borrowed blazer. She has said it did not feel real. She has said that her first instinct was that she had misheard. She has said that for several seconds she simply could not locate her own reaction, could not find where to put the information, because there was nowhere in the architecture of her existing understanding of her mother's life where a number like that could fit. Margaret had clipped coupons. Margaret had driven the same car for 11 years. Margaret had worked as a bookkeeper. Margaret had never, in 34 years of Claire's life, given any indication at all, that there was anything behind the curtain of that ordinary life except more ordinary life. And yet, according to documents that Claire would spend the following weeks reviewing with Hargrove and his team, The estate included investment accounts holding over $32 million in accumulated stock and fund positions. It included 2 rental properties in Columbus, currently generating combined annual income of approximately $80,000. It included a third property, a modest commercial unit in a strip mall in Gahanna, Ohio, that Margaret had purchased in 1999 and leased to a dry cleaning business for the past 2 decades. The entire estate, with the exception of a small bequest to Margaret's sister and a charitable donation to the church she had attended for 30 years, was left clearly and without condition to Claire and her sons Daniel and Marcus. Hargrove explained the terms carefully. He noted that Margaret had engaged the firm 17 years earlier and had updated her will twice since then. He noted that the will had been executed properly and witnessed by 2 individuals. He noted, it with the quiet emphasis of a man choosing his words deliberately, that the will contained one additional notation. Margaret had written in a handwritten addendum that had been notarized and attached to the formal document, a single explanatory paragraph. In it, she explained that she had kept her financial circumstances private throughout her life because she had grown up watching money tear families apart. She had watched people she loved become suspicious of each other and resentful of each other, and lose the things that mattered most because of the pursuit of things that did not. She had decided, early in her adult life, that she would accumulate what she could but tell no one, not because she was ashamed of it, but because she wanted the people in her life, and most especially her daughter, to be loved for who they were. She wanted Claire to find a partner who loved her when she had nothing, so that she would know, without question, that the love was real. She wrote that she was sorry for the secrecy. She wrote that she hoped Claire would understand it, in time, as the act of protection it was always meant to be. She wrote that she was proud of her daughter and she loved her. And then the letter ended. Claire sat in that conference room for several minutes without speaking. Hargrove gave her the time. Marcus was outside with her Aunt Diane. Daniel was in school. It was a Thursday morning in March, and outside the window of Hargrove and Associates, the sky was still that same flat, cold gray. And Claire Turner, sitting alone with a $47 million secret and a handwritten letter from her dead mother, understood several things at once. Yeah, she understood why her mother had lived the way she did. She understood something about the love behind the silence. And she understood, with a clarity that she would later describe as almost physical, what David's behavior in the weeks following her mother's death might actually mean. The question investigators and Hargrove's legal team began exploring in the weeks that followed was not complicated, but its implications were significant. Had David Okafor known, or suspected, the existence of Margaret's estate before or around the time of her death? And if so, when had he found out? And from whom? And what had he done with that knowledge? These are questions that, in an undisputed case, would have simple answers. In this case, the answers took considerably longer to arrive at, and according to sources familiar with the proceedings, or they arrived in a way that nobody fully anticipated. What emerged from a review of Margaret's electronic correspondence, email records that were accessed by Hargrove's team in the process of administering the estate, was that Margaret had, in the final weeks of her life, reached out to David directly. The nature of that communication, according to accounts of the documents, was that Margaret had decided to disclose the existence of her estate to David, not the full extent of it, but enough, and had made him an offer. She had told him, in effect, that she was aware the marriage was in difficulty. She had told him that she did not want her daughter to be hurt more than was necessary. She had proposed that if David agreed to a fair and equitable divorce settlement, one that protected Claire and the boys financially, she would ensure, from her estate, that he received a meaningful sum. David had responded. He had agreed in writing. What happened next is a matter of interpretation and legal argument. Margaret passed away before any formal agreement could be drawn up. The informal exchange had no binding legal status. And David, according to the account that emerged during civil proceedings, made a calculation. He made the calculation that the deal was no longer enforceable. He made the calculation that Claire, grieving and destabilized and unaware of her inheritance, would be too overwhelmed to mount any effective legal challenge. He made the calculation that moving fast, removing Claire from the home, establishing a new domestic situation with Simone, and presenting Claire with a fait accompli, was the strategy most likely to protect his interests. According to sources familiar with the proceedings, investigators believed David had known enough about the estate to understand that Claire was about to become financially independent in a way that would shift the power dynamic of any divorce proceedings significantly. And so, investigators suspected he had moved first. It is worth pausing here to acknowledge what that sequence of events represents. A woman buries her mother. Within 4 days, her husband, who according to the evidence available had been aware that her mother had disclosed significant wealth shortly before dying, evicts her and her 2 children from the family home. Within a week, he has established a public relationship with her closest friend. He does all of this before the estate reading takes place. He does all of this while Claire is at her most vulnerable, most disoriented, most grief-stricken, at the precise moment in her life when she is least equipped to understand what is being done to her and why. That is not, according to any psychological framework, the behavior of a man who has simply fallen out of love. That is the behavior of someone who understood the landscape and moved according to a plan. Claire retained legal counsel, a Columbus-based family attorney named Patricia Moss, within 2 weeks of the estate reading. Moss was known in Columbus legal circles as someone who specialized in exactly the kind of complex marital and inheritance cases that this situation had become. According to people familiar with the case, Moss reviewed the available documents, including the email exchange between Margaret and David, and concluded that while the informal agreement David had entered into with Margaret was not legally binding, the evidence of his foreknowledge, combined with his behavior in the days following Margaret's death, provided a compelling picture for the court. The civil proceedings that followed lasted 14 months. They were, by accounts of those who followed them, neither simple nor without moments of significant tension. David's legal team argued that he had entered into a good-faith communication with a dying woman and had agreed in principle to something that never became a formal contract. They argued that his decision to end the marriage had nothing to do with any financial calculation and was simply the product of a long-deteriorating relationship. They argued that the timing, while unfortunate, was coincidental. Yet Patricia Moss argued otherwise. She argued, methodically and with the documentation to support each point, that the timeline of David's actions, specifically the decision to remove Claire from the home before the estate reading, and the publicly documented establishment of a relationship with Simone during the period of maximum emotional disruption, constituted evidence of a deliberate strategy. She argued that the court should consider the full context of what had occurred. The court, in the end, agreed with her. David's claim to any portion of Margaret's estate was dismissed. His counterclaim for spousal support was denied. He was ordered to vacate the marital home, which was established as belonging to Claire. He received nothing. According to sources familiar with the outcome, David appealed the decision once. The appeal was rejected. Following the conclusion of the legal proceedings, he and Simone were no longer together. Claire has not provided a public statement about the status of her relationship with Simone. In the limited interviews she has given on the subject, she has declined to speak about Simone directly, saying only that some losses take longer to process than others, and that not all of them are deaths. It is a sentence that requires no explanation. What followed the conclusion of the legal proceedings was, by the accounts of people close to Claire, a period of careful and deliberate rebuilding. She purchased a home in the Dublin area of Columbus, a house with a garden large enough for the boys to run in, and a kitchen that she redid in the pale yellow color that her mother had always liked. Daniel, who was 13 by the time the legal proceedings concluded, has spoken in interviews about the period with a measured clarity unusual for someone his age. He has said that watching his mother navigate those years taught him more about what real strength looks like than anything else in his life so far. Marcus, younger and perhaps more protected from the full weight of what had happened, has said that the thing he remembers most about the difficult years is that his mother never stopped making his school lunches. That she was always there in the morning when he woke up. That no matter what was happening in the adult world he was not yet allowed full access to, she was present. That detail, the school lunches, the presence in the morning, is not a small thing. It is, in many ways, the entire story. Claire has spoken, in the years since, on about the experience of reading her mother's handwritten addendum, the explanatory letter that Margaret had attached to her will. She has said that she has read it many times. She has said that for a long time she felt angry at her mother for the secrecy, that there were moments when she believed that if Margaret had simply been honest, some portion of what happened might have been avoided. But she has also said that she no longer stays in that feeling, because she has come to understand something about her mother that took time to reach. Margaret Turner spent her entire adult life protecting the people she loved from the consequences of something she feared. The way money distorts things, the way it changes the air in a room, the way it can turn someone into a prize rather than a person. She was not wrong to fear that, and she had watched it happen. And her solution, unconventional and painful in its aftermath as it was, had worked in the deepest possible sense. Claire had been loved by someone who believed, for over a decade of marriage, that she was a woman of ordinary means. And the moment that man learned the truth, or suspected it, his mask had come off entirely and immediately. Margaret's secrecy had not failed her daughter. It had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had shown her, with absolute clarity, who was actually in her corner. There is a real story from 2023 that has stayed with a great many people, because it speaks to something similar about the relationship between money and meaning, and the private choices that shape a life from the inside out. His name was Jeffrey Holt, and he lived in a small town called Hinsdale, New Hampshire. For decades, according to reports from the Associated Press and multiple national news outlets, Holt was known to his neighbors as the unassuming caretaker of the mobile home park where he lived. He wore threadbare clothes. He rode a lawnmower around town because he had long since given up driving a car. He had no television and no computer. His mobile home was mostly empty of furniture. People waved at him when they drove past. They knew him as a quiet, curious man who did odd jobs, read financial newspapers by a brook, collected model trains, and never asked for anything. Jeffrey Holt died on June 6, 2023, at the age of 82. When his estate was read, the town of Hinsdale learned that the man they had known as a threadbare groundskeeper had, over the course of his quiet life, now accumulated a fortune of $3.8 million through patient, disciplined investing. He left every single cent of it to the town, not to family, not to individuals, to the community of 4,200 people that had simply been kind enough to wave at him as they drove by. The town administrator of Hinsdale said, in the aftermath of the revelation, that they would use the money as frugally as Mr. Holt himself had lived. That statement should be read as the highest possible form of tribute. Jeffrey Holt and Margaret Turner never knew each other. They lived different lives in different places, and their secrets served different purposes. But they were built from the same material. They understood that the accumulation of something is not the same as the display of it. They understood that what you choose not to show the world can protect you in ways that what you do show never can. They lived inside the space between what they had and what they allowed others to see. And they made that space count. Claire Turner today manages a foundation she established in her mother's name, the Margaret Turner Foundation for Women and Children, which provides financial counseling, housing assistance, and educational grants to women navigating transitions out of difficult domestic situations in the Columbus area. She has said in interviews that she did not plan to start the foundation. She said it was something that evolved out of her own experience of having been, however briefly, one of the women who needed it. She says her mother would have liked that. She says Margaret was never interested in being celebrated, but she was always interested in being useful. The foundation has, since its establishment, assisted over 400 families. The number grows each year. Daniel Okafor is now a teenager who, according to his mother, wants to study law. Marcus Okafor is younger and, according to his mother, wants to be a professional football player, though she notes that this ambition changes approximately every few months. They both live with Claire in Dublin, Ohio, in the pale yellow kitchen house. They both know, in the age-appropriate versions that Claire has shared with them, the broad outlines of what happened when they were very small. Daniel has said that he hopes, someday, to understand his grandmother fully. He says he thinks she must have been remarkable. He is not wrong. And as for the letter, the handwritten addendum that Margaret tucked into her will, the one that explains everything and apologizes for the secrecy and tells Claire that she is proud of her and loves her, Claire has said she keeps it in a drawer beside her bed. She reads it on the days when she needs to be reminded that the people who love us most are not always the ones who tell us everything. Sometimes they are the ones who, with the very last thing they leave behind, tell us exactly what we needed to know, exactly when we needed to hear it. Before you go, we want to ask you something. Do you think Margaret was right to keep her secret? Do you think the love of someone who stayed not knowing about the money means more than the love of someone who knew? Leave your answer in the comments. We read every single one, and the conversations that happen there are some of the most thoughtful we've ever been part of. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if it made you think about the people in your life who hold secrets they believe are protecting you, share it with someone you trust. Those conversations matter. If you're not subscribed yet, please take a moment right now to hit that button. Because the next story we are telling involves a man who was believed by everyone around him, his family, his colleagues, his community, to be one kind of person while quietly being something else entirely. It is a story about the distance between the version of ourselves we show the world and the version we guard most carefully. And it is a story you are not going to want to miss.